Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. My name's Jane Bayler, and I've got an amazing guest for you today. Welcome, Chris Hirst.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here, Chris. Now, Chris is the Global CEO of Havas Creative, and we're going to talk about that in a minute because that's a very, very senior position in media and advertising. And he's also the author of a book called No Bullshit Leadership. And this was actually the winner of the 2020 Business Book of the Year Awards. So that's an incredible achievement, and is currently also #1 in WH Smith. So congratulations, Chris.
Thank you. Yes, like I say, I don't know how many WH Smiths are open at the moment, but I'll take it wherever it comes from.
Okay. So, Chris, I'd love to hear all about your journey. How did you come to head up this amazing business? Where did it all start for you?
Gosh, well, certainly started a long time ago now. That's somewhat depressingly true. I suppose I had a slightly unconventional start. I did a degree in engineering, which I guess is quite unusual for somebody to go into advertising. So I did a degree in engineering, and in fact, my first job was that I worked in a factory, basically a glass factory in St Helens. For any of those in the northwest will know Pilkington Glass, which was actually fascinating, to be honest with you. I actually really quite enjoyed it. I worked as an apprentice in the factory, but by the time I'd done that for a year and I did a 4-year degree, by the end of that, the one thing I knew for certain was that I didn't want to be an engineer and I didn't want to work in a factory. So basically, I think looking back through the wrong end of the telescope, I suppose, into the past, I guess I just decided that I wanted something that was as far away from engineering as I could possibly get, and I ended up doing advertising. So I guess that was the start, and gradually, I suppose, I worked my way through my career.
Okay. So for some of our listeners who don't know much about Havas, could you just explain what the business actually does and what your day-to-day role entails?
The business is a marketing. I guess we're a marketing services business, so we have a global network of a range of agencies that cover everything in the marketing services spectrum, from digital planning, media planning and buying, digital, social, PR, creative, and increasingly these days, of course, CX, UX, e-commerce, data, you name it. So we have an array of agencies that do anything a client might want in the marketing services space, based in certainly all of the major economies around the world. And we have within that, we have 3 divisions. We have a media division, which is fairly self-explanatory. We have a healthcare division, and we have the creative division, which is the global division that I run. So I'm based in London. Our business is actually French owned and run. So my boss, the group CEO, is in Paris. And I guess 2 years ago, I spent an awful lot of time on planes. Last year, I spent an awful lot of time sitting in this chair. And let's see what this year brings.
Like all of us.
Exactly.
Like all of us. So what would you say has been the impact of the pandemic on the creative services industry, Chris? I mean, have you noticed big changes?
Yeah, I think the effect of the pandemic has been really significant. Frankly, I think it's been very significant on virtually every business and every sector you could think of. Some businesses, as we see and read frequently in the press, have thrived during this period. Other businesses have sort of muddled by, and other businesses, I think, have really struggled. I think the marketing services business is, again, I'm going to generalize because actually some of our businesses have done very, very well. Certainly our healthcare business practices done extremely well, but other businesses as well. But in general, I'd say the marketing services businesses, the thing that most clearly defines their performance is the economy. I mean, that's always been true. You talk about marketing services as being a sort of a bellwether indicator. Marketing services tends to get hit first. because it's a very significant, essentially, or it's considered to be a discretionary spend. I guess some of us would debate that, but it gets hit first and it comes back first. That's the typical shape of marketing services businesses, and in really basic terms, the pandemic hasn't been any different to that. From a business point of view, and what we saw last March was an almost instantaneous global slowdown everywhere. And in fact, slowdown is probably understating it. I mean, I think pretty well every business, every leader, just about everywhere, suddenly found themselves in totally unprecedented circumstances. So we saw an extremely fast cuts to marketing spends basically everywhere during, I'd say, starting at the end of March. But then what we started to see, I guess, end of April, middle of May, I think everybody was looking around at each other thinking, well, how much worse can it get? I mean, when will the graph stop getting, when will the graph start to flatten out? And I feel like that happened about May, June last year. So, so flat became the new growth, I think, for sort of the middle, sort of June, July, August, I guess, last year. And I'm generalizing. It's like the shape was the same. The timing was slightly different to different economies around the world, but basically the pattern was the same. And then what we started to see nearly everywhere was we saw a gradual return to confidence and a gradual, I guess, return to reinvestment through the back 4 or 5 months of last year, and despite the fact there continues to be significant uncertainty in most markets, or not all, but in most markets around the world, I think that sort of pattern of cautious return to investment, let's say, is happening. And obviously, what we're seeing now in the UK, interestingly, is not just since the start of the vaccination program, but I think since there's started to be some real concrete evidence that vaccination program is making a very substantial impact on the disease. Then I think we've definitely seen a far more, we've seen that rate of return improve. I said long answer to your question, but I guess it's a big question. The final thing I'd say is what we do still see is a relative. It's a slightly convoluted sentence. We still are experiencing a relative lack of visibility, and I think that's not just true of us. That's true for us because we're essentially a consultancy business. Because that's true for our clients as well. I still think that most businesses are sort of thinking, okay, we feel like we've got a reasonable idea what the next quarter is going to bring, but we find ourselves in such unprecedented times. It's people are a little bit reluctant to make very hard predictions, let's say 4, 6, 9 months ahead at the moment.
I mean, of course, all brands do need to keep reinvesting, don't they? But people's habits have changed, haven't they, massively? And I'm sure that must have impacted the way that your clients think about their brand activities.
Well, of course, we would have always advised that our clients should be investing in their brands. I mean, if you have a brand, you have to invest in it. That's for sure. Now you have to work
exactly
out, because that's what brands are. Brands that pretend they don't do market. Otherwise, you couldn't have a brand. I mean, yes, I'd say just about every business that I talk to at the moment is thinking incredibly hard about how their business has changed as a result of the pandemic. And we're not just talking there about how consumer behavior has shifted. Obviously, we all know that people are buying more online, for example, but it's not just that. We also see in other sectors, you can't go on holiday online. You might be able to book it online, but you can't go to the pub online. So there's other sectors that obviously have had a huge hit because they're in the hospitality sector, for example. And what does hospitality look like in the future? So it's not just as not simple, but it's not just as singular as everybody's talking about e-commerce. Although an awful lot of people are talking about e-commerce, I'd make a slightly broader point, actually, Jane, which is, I think if you look at the world we're emerging into, we're obviously right now talking about COVID, but I think if you look at the past 3 years, in the past 3 years, we've seen four huge moments of discontinuous change, and those four moments are the Me Too movement, Extinction Rebellion, or the climate emergency, whatever phrase you want to use for that, Black Lives Matter, of course, last summer, and COVID. And I think it's important, if you're in a position of leadership, frankly, whether you're in business, whether you're in any sort of organization, if you're a politician, that you have to be considering these four events. Any one on their own has created huge, discontinuous, and permanent changes to societies around the world. And I think the implications of these four, I think of the implications of these four as heat. So that's humanity, ecology, and technology. And it's not that the trend, it's not that those, not that humanity, ecology, and technology weren't issues that organizations were thinking about, but what these four mega events have done is they've taken those three factors and they've pushed them right onto the boardroom table. So now they can't just be one of many things that organizations are thinking about. They have to be fundamentally part of the business strategy, and they have to belong to the CEO, the CMO, the CTO. And I think that we are, we are far closer to the start than the end of the impact of heat, both in terms of our society, in terms of our business, the relationship business has with our society, and indeed, I think, politics and government as well.
That's a fascinating summary. So out of all of those issues, do you have one that you feel is particularly close to your heart? Or do you just feel, okay, all of these things, we're going to take them all on board, we're going to champion them, we're going to incorporate them into the fabric of our business? Or is there anything that resonates particularly personally with you?
I wouldn't say there's one that does. I think that, and in a sense, I think humanity, ecology, and technology, I feel like they're almost like I feel like particularly humanity and ecology are kind of twins, in the sense that from a business's point of view, they have fundamentally changed the way that businesses' relationship, I think, with society. So I think now, not for the first time, but certainly it's becoming almost accepted that it's changed employers' relationship with employees, employees' relationship with employers, with brands' relationship with the boardroom, with society. I mean, even the implications of ecology are suddenly, if you're a brand owner, and by the way, it doesn't just apply to brands, but suddenly if you're a brand owner, you're not just thinking about your actions with relations to your consumers. What's interesting about implications of ecology is you're thinking about your actions in relation to everybody, people that are never going to buy your product or even heard of your product. And so I think that we'll find ourselves now. I mean, I was going to say in the future, but I think this change has happened, and I think now it's a case of society and business and organizations almost catching up. I think that, for example, if you're going to go and buy an ice cream, or if you're the owner of an ice cream brand, I think suddenly you find yourself in a position where people will be making decisions around that based on not just, do I like the taste of it, but they'll be asking your organization questions about your DE&I strategy. They're going to be asking your organization questions about gender representation on your board. They're going to be asking about your carbon footprint. And so it's a really profound change, I think. And it's not just about how businesses, it's not just about businesses' priority. I think it's about a change to businesses' relationship and role in wider society. And of course, it's a challenge for businesses, but also it's an opportunity, because the businesses that get it, people want organizations to share their values, and the organizations that do, I think, will will thrive.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that's been a increasing trend over the last few years. As we get more transparency, I think consumers do want to know the people behind the brands, and they want to know their values, as you said, and they want to be able to align with values, not just a product. So that's a really interesting perspective on that. So, Chris, I'd love to go on to talk about your book now. And what inspired you to write a book on leadership?
Well, it was a little bit of a it was an accident in some ways, or certainly it wasn't planned. So about I guess now probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was asked to do a presentation to a group of people on leadership. And like a lot of people who are asked to do presentations, I didn't think about it until about 2 days before. And 2 days before, I thought, "Oh no, I'm going to do a presentation on leadership." And at about the same time, I discovered that same group, the people organising this conference, had asked two other people to do presentations on leadership to this same group. And I was sort of the filling in the sandwich, and they were both kind of industry luminaries. So I was following luminary A, I was in the middle, and then I was followed by luminary B. And suddenly I thought, oh, blimey,
Oh,
this isn't just, it's not just I've got to write a presentation. This has become competitive. I've got to try and find something different to say about the subject of leadership. So anyway, I did this. I did a presentation to them. It went quite well. It went fine. And I got home and I kind of lay in bed. And I remember, I think it was on a Thursday or something. I remember lying in bed on the Saturday morning afterwards thinking, oh, I really quite enjoyed that. And I think there's something in what I've just talked about. And I thought, I wonder if there's a book in that. But I didn't know at that point. I thought to myself, well, it could be a book, it could be a paper, or it could be a 1,000-word, article. I don't know. So I sat down and I thought, well, let's see if I can write 10,000 words. And if I can write 10,000 words, let me see whether or not I think that I've got another 10,000 I can still find, and so on. And so I suppose it began like that, really. And it became an extremely clarifying process, and one that I think I actually learned a lot about. I actually think I learned a lot about leadership in writing the book about leadership, if you see what I mean, in terms of just making it's very different. I think having a sort of a half-formed idea is one thing. We all have those all the time. But then to sit down and think, well, I have to write a book called No Bullshit Leadership. So, I mean, I have to at least convince myself that it's not bullshit. And I've got to try and do that for 50,000 words. So, yeah.
did you have a publisher at this point, Chris, or did you just say, well, I'll write it and then I'll find a publisher?
So I didn't have a publisher, no.
Or I can publish something.
I didn't have a publisher. After I'd written about 30,000 words, I found an agent. And I said to him, would you mind having a look at what I've written? And he did, and he certainly didn't say, oh my word, this is a work of rare genius. But nor did he say, nor did he say, I'd stick with a day job if I was you. So he didn't snap me up or the book up at that point, but he was encouraging enough to say, you know what, I think there's something here, keep going. Which was actually all I needed at that point, because it is hard work and it can feel a bit lonely. So I persevered.
Yeah.
I persevered, and then he is now my agent, and he then found me a publisher. So yeah, the whole process was very interesting.
Amazing. So, Chris, if I was to ask you what is no bullshit leadership, what would you say? Why no bullshit leadership?
Well, because I think an awful lot of what we are sold, and the leadership industry is a huge industry. I mean, I refer to it in the book as the leadership industrial complex, and that is conferences, training programs,
Right.
books, business schools, consultancies. This industry makes billions and billions
Yeah.
out of the subject of leadership, and in a sense have a vested interest in making it feel like it is a sort of elite knowledge available only to a chosen few. And my argument, my fundamental argument, is most of what we're sold is snake oil. It's bullshit. And the problem with that is, well, it's twofold, I think. Firstly, this bullshit gets in the way of people who are already in leadership positions from fulfilling their potential. And secondly, I think even worse than that,
Yeah.
it inhibits whole swathes of society from thinking that leadership is ever something that they could aspire to. And one of the first sentences that I wrote when I sat down and started writing the book, which seems quite prescient now, given I wrote it 3 years ago, one of the first sentences I wrote was, "We need more better leaders everywhere, from our schools to our hospitals." And I think that is true. And I think the bullshit around the subject fundamentally inhibits people's ability from fulfilling their potential as leaders. And my argument is that most leaders aren't the people we think of when we think of leaders. When we think of leaders, we tend to think of CEOs, generals, prime ministers, dot-com billionaires. By my definition, I define leadership within the book. My definition of leadership is anybody who has people they're responsible for is a leader, whether that's 4 people or 40,000 people. And by that definition, there are millions of people who are leaders just in the UK alone. And we all benefit if
Yeah.
those people are able to fulfill their potential. And one of the ways of doing that is just demystifying the subject. So my argument is it's difficult but not complicated.
Yeah, I love that idea as well, because it's very relevant to entrepreneurship, it's relevant to families, it's relevant to any kind of group, whether there's a label attached to it or not. And of course, I mean, leadership is important in families, for example, isn't it? If you're the head of a family, if you're the mother or a father, then you are a leader and you have to exercise leadership skills, or not, as the case may be. And it's the same. I work with a small team that they're not my full-time employees, but I have an outsourced team. And so I'm very conscious that I have to bring my leadership skills to that team in order to keep them motivated. But I don't necessarily think of myself every day as a leader, although, I'm obviously bringing perhaps a bit more awareness to it than other people that maybe came from a different background. But I love that idea that everybody has the potential to be a leader, and everybody is a leader at times. It's almost it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that people who give up their Sundays to run Sunday league football teams are leaders. People that run departments in schools are leaders. I mean, I would be quite typical in that within 18 months probably of starting work, I had a couple of people that worked for me, maybe 2 years, I didn't see myself as a leader. And we don't, even though we pay lip service to the idea that good organizations, good teams have leaders at lots of different levels, in actual fact, as a society, as organizations, we don't really walk that walk. We don't use that language with people. And of course, the majority of people in those positions don't see themselves as leaders either. And that's to the organization's detriment, their own personal detriment, and of course also to the detriment of the people that they're responsible for. And I think also, Jane, you can apply a lot of the principles to yourself as well. To leading and managing yourself. I mean, it's not a perfect comparison, but there are certainly some similarities.
Yeah. So, what would you say is a quality or the characteristics of somebody who is a good personal leader of themselves,
Oh,
Chris?
well, I mean, I actually, one of the things that I carefully avoid in a sense in the book is answering that question because because I think that there isn't I don't think there is a leadership type. I mean, that's basically my argument. And certainly I would argue that I'm not particularly, even if there is, I'm not a social scientist or anything like that. So I would argue that I'm not particularly well qualified to comment on it. But fundamentally, I think there isn't a leadership type. I think there's lots of different styles of leadership. When it comes to ourselves, I don't have a really good answer to that question. Again, what I would say though is, I think of us all like the counters in Trivial Pursuit. When you play Trivial Pursuit, you have those counters, and you have to get the different color segments. And to win a Trivial Pursuit, you have to get the counter to the middle, and you have to have all one of each segment. You have lots of different color segments in the counter, and I think that's how I think of us as individuals and how we can be successful leaders. And by that, what I mean is that to be a successful leader, you are at the same time, we are all lots of different people at the same time. So pretty well all of us are partners to somebody. We're all somebody's children. So we're children, we're siblings, we're parents, we're peers, we're bosses, we're employees. We're all these things at the same time, as well as being whatever it is, bakers or photographers or tennis players, whatever we do in our spare time. And we're all these things at the same time. And I think to sort of live a fulfilled, balanced life, and I think to be a successful leader, you have to try and live a balanced life. You have to try and keep a balance between these different components. And I think you have to try and maintain some degree of humility, in a sense, of understanding that at different times you're all these different things. I like playing tennis, but I mean, when I'm getting thrashed by some 18-year-old, he or she doesn't give a shit that I'm some agency CEO, and no, I don't give a shit at the time as well. I just don't want to get beaten, So at different times, we have to look after the different us's, and I think that's what matters. We have to invest in all the different versions of us, I think, to be able to be a successful leader, and crucially, I think, to be able to sustain the effort that it takes to be a successful leader, because it's hard work.
I think it is hard work, and I think to be conscious around everybody in our lives is a massive effort for most people. And do you think that stress plays a part in terms of people's ability to lead? Because I've noticed that certainly with me, for example, when I'm under stress, I feel as though, call it if a leader of myself, I feel as though I become a worse leader of myself, in that perhaps I make worse decisions. And I think that I become perhaps a worse leader of others because I'm looking inside rather than looking outside and thinking, how can I serve others and make a difference to them? So I don't know. I'd be really interested to know what your opinion is on that, Chris.
Well, stress is a fact of life for people in positions of leadership. But frankly, I think you could probably argue that it's a fact of life. Full stop. It's not necessarily.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different things that cause us stress, and I think certainly in my experience, it's mostly. I mean, broadly, it's unavoidable. You can mitigate its effects, but you can't, I think, hope to go through life, for most of us. Maybe some people can. But I don't think you can hope to go through life
No.
without experiencing moments of stress, sometimes, real extreme stress. I, so I got sort of two thoughts on it. First of all, that's why I think this idea of thinking about the different versions of ourselves and being, and that I think is one of the ways of at least compartmentalizing stress. I think what is particularly exhausting, and I've been guilty of this for long parts of my career, is to allow stress in one part of my life, typically work, to bleed out and across the other aspects of my life, and that's definitely to my detriment personally, and I think probably the detriment of some of the other people in my life as well. The other thing that I'd say is, which I think stress does, is stress is exhausting. I mean, stress is very, very tiring and draining. And I think one of the things that, as a leader, is that you kind of are a bit like the Energizer Bunny. You're a bit like a battery, and often you are. And teams
Mm.
need energy, emotional energy, as well as physical energy. And you, in a
Mm.
sense, I think, are the sort
Yeah.
of energy source of last resort. Where ultimately, you have to, if
Yeah.
necessary, and it isn't always the case, but if necessary, you have to be the person that provides that energy for the team. But all of us have only got so much to give, no matter who we are. And so I think that's the other reason why I think the other
Hmm.
pieces of our life are so important, and that's how we find ways to recharge. And I think it is possible. And again, I've been in this place at various points in my life where you get into a vicious circle, I think, where you're stressed, you're drained, you don't recharge properly. That makes you more stressed and more tired, and it becomes a vicious circle. And I it's true of all of us, but lying
Yeah.
awake at 3 a.m. worrying about decisions I have taken, or worrying about decisions I haven't taken, or things that might happen, it's never made me better at solving or dealing with those things. Now,
Hmm.
rationally, we all know that, but but actually dealing with it is a different kettle of fish. But I think that's why it is important to at least try and have that balance. And in fact, actually writing the book, interesting, because even though writing any book is hard work and it takes a lot of time. Actually, I found it quite refreshing, because it's using a different part of your brain, and it's just, you have to concentrate. You haven't got time to be worrying about something else over here if you're trying to make, that paragraph really tight and really work. There isn't space in your brain to to
Yeah.
hold all those concerns and worries. And so actually, even if on a Saturday morning I'd sit and 3 hours,
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
end of those 3 hours, I'd be tired, but I'd think, oh, that's great. I'm sort of tired of writing, but actually, strangely enough, I feel invigorated in other ways. So having other stuff is a great, for me. For me at least, it's a good way to
Yeah.
recharge.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also a great fan of writing, and I find it extremely therapeutic as well, because as you said, it's just the brain's ability to just go to a place where you can just focus, and the world goes away and you can just think. And I just love it. I really do. um, so were you surprised and delighted, I'm sure, when you won the your award, which is book of the year? I mean, isn't that amazing?
Well, it is amazing. I'll tell you.
What an accolade.
Well, I'll tell you a story about it though, because the the night that I won, and I honestly don't think I've ever won an award for anything in my life, but at least not me personally, up until that point. And the night, in fact, I think the exact, not just the night, but the exact time that they announced, it was last March. So we were already in lockdown. We were in kind of informal lockdown. I don't know if you remember, there's pretty well everybody started to stop doing things informally before formal lockdown started. So the ceremony was cancelled. We were all
Yeah.
at home. It was being done virtually like this. But the actual announcement of me winning was at the exact same time that Boris Johnson was live on the television telling the country that, that was it. We're complete lockdown. So probably,
Oh.
the most watched event of the century, probably on the TV, was the Prime Minister saying, right, you're all locked in the house for the foreseeable future, was the exact moment. So I was like, oh, really? Honestly? So yeah, there we go.
Oh. So the event went unnoticed by the
Exactly.
whole world
Me,
except you at
exactly.
the
I was
time.
watching. That was it. Yeah.
Ah, so what impact has it had on your life or your business, if any, to have got that award? Or is it just, oh, well, that was nice to have, a
I
business as
don't. I
usual?
mean, I don't think the award itself is really nice to get, and it's not. It's very flattering. I, but I think the book has made a big difference. Writing the book is the thing I think that's made. Well, I mean, the book was I mean, actually,
Yeah.
no, actually, that's true. Writing the book, even just that act actually did make a difference. But obviously, getting the book published and people reading the book and seeing the book has made a difference, I think. And I mean, I don't really. My view has always been that people talk about having career plans and things like that, and I actually think that's mostly very, very difficult to do. It's very difficult to really plan in a structured way unless you're going to go into a very, I think, maybe a very vocational, like, I want to be a pilot, I train to be a pilot, I become a pilot. But I think it's very difficult to have a proper plan, a particularly structured plan for a career. But what I think is possible to do, and the way I now have come to think about it, which I didn't used to, is I think about sort of our careers or our lives and our sense of satisfaction in terms of opportunities. I think the more opportunities we are able to generate for ourselves, the more in control we feel, and just the more having opportunities is a great thing. I mean, that's how you can progress. Without opportunity, you can't move forward. But opportunities mostly don't just turn up. You have to create uh, opportunities. And I see opportunities as like doors.
Mm.
Okay, so they're just door. The more doors that you can create in front of you, the more opportunities you have, and you can look through all of those doors. Which doesn't mean, by the way, you have to walk through all of them. You might say, "Oh no, I don't do that." And
Yeah.
what lies behind the doors that you go through? Well, there's just a lot more doors, and I think that's kind of how I think about it. And writing the book and being on your podcast and all these kind of things that come of it are just they're just about opportunities that come up. They're people you meet, they're conversations you have, they're thought processes that open up. I mean, and I think that's what it's done really for me. So at the moment, for example, I'm sort of midway through taking the content of the book and turning it into a training program. I'm working with some people. I mean, I don't know anything about training, but I'm working with some people that do, and we're going to develop essentially a licensed training program from the book. And I don't know what'll come of that. I mean, by the way, if anybody's interested who's listening, go to the website, nobullshitleadership.com, put your email in, register interest, and when we've got that, we'll send you an email and tell you more about it. There'll be a holding page up in the next week. In fact, by the time this goes live, that will
Fabulous.
be there. So I don't know what'll come of that, but I know there's been quite a lot of already, without me really telling anybody about it. You're probably the first public person I've told. Already, I know there's a bit of demand from that, and that's interesting. I don't know what'll come of that either. So yeah, create opportunities, create doors.
I love the way that you express that. So let's talk about leadership in marketing and leadership in marketing services. So what's your feeling about that? What does leadership marketing as a term mean anything to you, Chris?
No. No, it
It
doesn't.
doesn't mean
Leadership
anything.
marketing, no.
Do you think it's just a no? Do you think it's a gimmick, a gimmicky term, leadership marketing, or do you think that it's meaningful? What do you think?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm not being difficult. I don't know what it means. It might well go into, for somebody who's written a book called No Bullshit Leadership. I'm afraid that might go into the bullshit category. I don't know what it means. Does it
Okay,
mean? Does it mean?
okay.
Does it mean people? Does it mean leading marketing businesses, or does it mean? I don't know what do you mean by it? What do you mean by?
So I actually been following a guy on YouTube, and he talks a lot about leadership marketing. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Leadership marketing is taking the position of a leader through your communication. So taking your client, you become the leader to your client, and you are leading them through a process or a journey to their commitment with you. I think that's what he was talking about. And he uses the term leadership marketing. I mean, maybe it's just a slick term, but I kind of like that, because obviously I'm interested in leadership. I'm also, I'm a marketer myself, so I'm just interested in putting those two terms together and actually thinking, yeah, well, what does this actually mean? So I just thought, right, you're the guy to
Well, I
ask.
think he's the guy to ask because I
But
don't know what it
doesn't
means.
doesn't
He's the guy. You
he's
get
the
him
guy to
on
ask?
and ask him
Okay,
to talk about
all
leadership
right
marketing. I don't
then.
know what it means. I think it's
All
two
right
words
then.
to sit together. And by the way, he may be very, very eloquent. I'm sorry. I mean, he may have an extremely eloquent argument about it. It's not a phrase I've ever heard. I mean, so I'm somewhat unhelpfully don't really have anything to add about it, to be honest with you. I mean, I think you could say
Okay.
that some brands might say that we're going to take a leadership position in a category. You might say that that's a fairly well established,
Hmm. Yeah.
way of thinking about categories. You talk about brand leaders. Obviously, we'll have all heard that phrase, challenger brands, and there's a whole lot of quite very far more learned people than me have written a lot about both. That makes sense to me, and
Yeah.
I suppose maybe leadership marketing is a way to make your brand the brand leader, maybe, but I don't know what he means by it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let's talk about leadership in marketing services and in creative businesses in general, because that's my background. As you know, we talked about this briefly beforehand, but I used to work for a global advertising agency. I worked in media and entertainment for around 20 years before I became an entrepreneur. So I'm very familiar with the challenges of creative agencies and businesses. So, how does leadership? How does it manifest specifically in your sector? What are the particular challenges or the particular opportunities, do you think, for leaders in creative businesses?
Um, well, I think I think the principles. I think the fundamental principles are the same. I really, really fundamentally believe that. I don't think that the principles of leadership are different based on what category you work within. And I think that's really important for people to understand, because that's one of the examples I would give of why there is so much kind of bullshit all over the subject, because everybody's busy overcomplicating it and saying, oh, it's different in this category and that category, and it's different in my business. And fundamentally, I think that it isn't. And that is a
Right.
central premise of my argument. By the way, people can agree or disagree with that, but that's my premise. I think that creative agencies or creative businesses are obviously entirely people-based businesses, and again, that's not in any sense unique to
Mhm.
them. We are basically consultancy businesses, really. We call ourselves agencies, but we're consultancies. We have this weird way of differentiate. We say, oh, there's consultancies and there's agencies, which I'm not sure is very helpful, and I think actually at the moment is increasingly unhelpful. But we provide consultancy services to our clients, and within our just within our business, within Havas, just in the UK, for example, we've got probably about 15 or 16 individual businesses, consultancies, and there's virtually no overlap between any of them. So it gives you that gives you an idea of the sheer breadth that there exists within marketing services, when you can have kind of 15 businesses and they all exist in fairly well defined different parts of the category, but they're all linked by the fact that
Yeah.
they are entirely people driven consultancy businesses. Now, I would certainly say for businesses like that, there's only two. And again, by the way, I could apply this even if I think I could convince myself this applies even if we had factories and all those other things as well. But let's put that to one side. But I'd say in businesses like ours, there's really two factors that differentiate whether you're a good business, an average business, or bad business. And I think those two things are talent and culture. That's the only thing
Mm.
that makes up our business, and indeed all of our competitors, is talent and culture. And I remember
Yeah.
being put in charge of when I first became CEO as a CEO, and so that was in about 2010. And until that point, I hadn't really, to my shame, honestly, I hadn't really thought about what it was that made the business that I was the CEO of, which at the time was a total dog of a business. It was a shit business. And what was it
Was
though?
it?
Why was our business a dog of a business, and our competitor that was 100 yards down the road a brilliant business? What actually was it? And I had this I had this kind
Mm,
of really what I found was a liberating thought in a sense, which was all consultancies, all agencies are just buildings full of people. That's all they are. We have a building with people in it. They have a building with people in it. None of us even own the building. These days, we're not even in the same building,
mhm.
right? So, but we're just buildings with people.
No.
And so, what was the difference between the two? And the difference is just talent and culture. And ultimately, I actually think the real driving difference is culture. Uh, and again, this
Yeah,
isn't
agree.
rocket science. Not many people are going to go, oh God, nobody's ever said that before. But I think that culture is a misunderstood concept. Is a lot of cynicism around the word culture in an
Oh,
organizational sense. And for me, culture is people think of culture
mm,
as being this soft, squishy thing. You'll go to people's websites, okay, and they'll say, oh, yeah, we've got a great culture. We provide fruit at lunchtimes and all this stuff. And that's got nothing to do with culture at all. Culture in an organizational sense is the environment a leader creates in order for their teams to outperform. That's what organizational culture is. And if you're creating a culture that
mm.
allows your teams to outperform,
Love that.
you're going to win by definition. Because when we think of virtually all businesses,
Mm,
virtually all businesses, by virtually all I mean 99.99%, maybe more businesses haven't got anything unique about them in terms of their product. What they're trying to do is they're trying to do a common thing better than the competition. Virtually all businesses are trying to do that. And then you say, well, how? How
yeah,
can my business do a common thing better than the competition? Well, you know what? It's talent and culture. Ultimately, that's the thing that's going to drive you to be able to achieve that. And I think that is absolutely true of creative agencies and
yeah,
every business in the consultancy space.
yeah. I mean, that totally resonates with me because I work for a few different businesses, and they
Mm.
were very, very markedly different in terms of the level of attention, should we say, to detail in terms of that whole culture, and whether they really thought about it, and whether they made the effort to give people a good time, really, because at the end of the day, there has to be a balance between expectation and actually treating people as valued human beings. And I think without culture, there's often a sort of exploitation, cynicism. That there's the conditions that make people feel, they just don't feel inspired about going to work and doing their best. So I know that I totally understand
Well, of
that.
course, all organizations have a culture. I mean, they all have one. The question is, do they
Mm,
have a culture that allows them to outperform? I mean, is the culture something that's, you take somebody from team A, you put them in team B. If team B has got an effective organizational culture, that person will perform, will be able to perform and contribute to the team's objectives at a different level to what they would have been if that culture wasn't an effective culture. And that's why it's such a powerful thing. We've all,
mm,
probably on a personal level, and/or we've seen it happen to other people, that you can take the same individual and they can work at two different companies or in two different teams within the same company, and they can appear to be almost different people. And we've experienced that ourselves. Our ability to sort of perform at our best is so influenced by the culture we find ourselves in. And we spend a lot of our time as leaders in organizations of all
yeah.
types talking about whether person A is, we evaluate people all the time, right? We have this: is this person a rising star? Are they in the right? What do we think about this person? How do we score this person's performance? But what we so often forget is, before you can evaluate anybody's
Mm,
performance, you have to think of two other factors. First of all, are they in a culture that allows them to perform at their best? And second of all, are they clear what it is that's
Mm-hmm.
being expected of them? So, and so often people, those two things just are not in place. And so when I think of the leaders that work for me, the CEOs that work for me, and like a lot of agency networks, there's quite a lot of CEOs around the world that work for me. My part of the task is to say, is that
Yeah.
person, can I do my best? To what extent am I able to create an environment, a culture that allows that person to perform? And second of all, is that person absolutely clear what it is that we want them to deliver, what we want them to do? Then, only then can you say, well, okay, I've kind of done my bit, now you've got to do your bit.
Mm.
And I'll say one other thing, actually. You mentioned cynicism. For me, cynicism, there's a lot of cynicism around the word organizational culture. There's a lot of cynicism around values and all those kind of things that companies like to talk about. The reason the cynicism, I think, is, for me, cynicism exists in the gap between what you say and what you do. That's where cynicism thrives. And the reason, yeah, and the reason
Yeah, yeah.
I think the reason there's a lot of cynicism around words like culture in an organizational sense or values is because, of course, a lot of organizations say what their culture is, but everybody in that organization knows that that's bullshit. And so there's this ball. And so cynicism isn't
Yeah.
inevitable. The way you deal with cynicism is you close the gap between what you say and what you do.
Amazing. I just love that. So on that note, Chris, I think our interview's drawing to a close. All I can say is that it has been such a pleasure to interview you today. We've had such a fascinating conversation. So if anybody wants to get hold of your book, is it on Amazon? And is
Well,
that the best place to go at the
if you're listening to
moment?
this in March, I think you've got to go to Amazon. It's available in paperback, hardback. Yeah. Although you may be elsewhere in the
All
world,
right.
it's available. It's available
Okay.
globally, but it's available as an audio book and an ebook. So in all the modern ways. So yeah. You-
Okay, fantastic. And if people want to find out more about your ideas and about the new leadership program,
so go
where do
to
they go again?
nobullshitleadership.com.
Where do they?
That was depending on when this goes live, but we're at the start of March now. By the middle of March, there will be there is a website there already, but there will be an opportunity for you to log your details. We're looking for trainers who are interested in becoming affiliates for the program. We're looking for corporates who would like to have their own internal teams trained, and we're looking for individuals who'd like to go through the program. So whether you're a trainer who wants to come and partner with us, whether you're a corporate who wants your team's training, or whether you're just an individual who'd like to improve their leadership skills, come along. It'll be clear where you'll be signposted. Give us your details, and we'll be in touch.
That sounds great. Well, thank you again, Chris. It's been a real pleasure, and yeah, I wish you a very successful journey with that.
Thanks, Jane. Lovely to talk to you.
Bye for now.